Hi, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us this morning for IRMSA's inaugural Software Hub, a digital marketplace where we are looking to share with you all the leading software providers in the risk management, in the data control management space. So a little bit of background. So, well, let me first start by saying thank you so much for attending this morning. We have over 218 participants in our demo hub that IRMSA is hosting. So really exciting times. And by virtue of just introducing the concept, as Chief Risk Advisor at IRMSA, I've been inundated with our members, both individual and corporate members, contacting me to say, Chris, please recommend a software that we can use, in some cases a maturity assessment or something like that, and they would come out and they would say, which software is best to help us see us through the transition on our softwares, and they're looking to buy risk management software. And of course, as you would know, I cannot do that because all of the software providers in South Africa, international, are either members of IRMSA, individual members, corporate members, some are fellows, and of course, we are not in a position to recommend which software is the best. And so what did we come up with? We developed virtual marketplace, or the digital marketplace, our first marketplace where we could invite all of our members to come and share with you their wares, their intelligence, their software that they've developed and that they are marketing out there in support of risk management. And it is on the back of that we've created this platform for you to be able to dial in and for you to be able to be led through this process in as far as having access to looking at all the wares that are all the solutions that are made available in the marketplace. And so welcome much for joining us. And of course, our first software provider that we are welcoming onto our platform is Philip Tillman, and he's supported by Lee Carmichael in this session. Welcome, Lee. Thank you very much. You are our guinea pigs, as it may, taking up this opportunity. As a matter of fact, coming up with this opportunity as well. So I'm welcoming Philip and Lee, and they are from SurTech, which was formed through the acquisition their GRC solution, a business previously operated by Adapt IT. And so now is the sole distributor of galvanized and vacuous software. Yes? Say again. Hello?
No worries, Chris, I've muted.
And in any case, okay, thank you. So I want to introduce SurTech, galvanized and vacuous software and the services in South Africa. This is our first webinar, and it's hosted by SurTech. And they are going to showcase the high bond by the galvanized platform, a solution for GRC that is data-driven. Now, you guys will know that we've forever been supported and supporting the idea that we must become more risk intelligent. And so without further ado, one to Philip, but just before I do that, please be on the lookout for the polls during our session. We will be engaging you through our polls. Please be on the lookout that the software leverages key risk indicators, key control indicators, and then lastly, we also on our social media platforms, we are highlighting as click-through banners where you can get more information around SurTech, their website, and the product. And with this, I'm going to hand over to Philip and Lee. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Chris. Thank you very, very much. Cool. So, Chris, I think they muted you. Yes. So it's just me on. So, good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here at the inaugural IRMSA demo software event. I'd like to clarify, as Chris did in fact say, so the goal here is it's great for software companies because when we sponsor other events, you know, we're quite shy about talking about what we do because we know everyone doesn't come to a breakfast or a conference to talk about our software. So it's great to give the individual software companies a platform to unashamedly say what's amazing about what they do and how they do it. And really that's what today is for. I'm going to share my screen and make sure that's all coming through. But in order to test the polls, the first polls, just to make sure this works, because you know it's a risk management exercise. Quibus, can we please just kind of open the first poll as a test to make sure that this is going to work and pop up? Of course, I can't see this because I'm sharing my screen. So Quibus, will you just let me know that it's there?
Yes, it's just been launched, Phil.
Okay, great. So guys, there's some debate. You can hear I have a slight English accent. You know, I've been here half my life and I get very confused. So by way of a test, I thought I would introduce and find out who was the best team at the last Rugby World Cup. South Africa, England, Wales, or Japan? And if those of you who hear the beeping in the background, that's every time somebody joins, my microphone is going to pick up that beeping. Nothing I can do about that. Okay, so I'm glad we've done that. So we've only got 41 votes, but that's absolutely fine because it's a test vote and there's more coming in. But Quibus, this appears to be broken because it says South Africa was at the top. So perhaps if while we're doing the next ones, you can just fix the polling and we can make sure that that works, that everyone knows how to use the polling. Okay, thank you.
I will make sure.
Okay, good. Thank you. Let's move along. Okay, so today I'm going to be joined by AJ. Certainly Chris did invite Lee. I can assure you Lee is a lot better looking than AJ, but AJ knows the software best, so he's going to be talking about that. AJ, would you introduce yourself? You're on mute.
Hi everyone, my name is AJ and I'm the solution specialist on the HiBond platform from SurTech itself. Yeah, thanks.
So great, thanks very much, AJ. Okay, guys, so what we're going to do today, talk about expectations. I'm going to spend a brief time in PowerPoint because you can do anything in PowerPoint. We want to show you software. In PowerPoint, I'm 1.75 meters. In reality, I'm not. We're going to talk about our philosophy. We're going to talk about why so many organizations, and there's such a wave of companies that are moving from their existing software platforms and moving on to the galvanized platforms, and why robotic process automation is really the key trend of the year, and how we do that, and how we're the leader in that respect, and how that makes sense. I just want to clarify some terminology. So we're a local entity in South Africa called SurTech. We're the distributor for galvanized products. The galvanized product today, which is the governance, risk and compliance product, is called HiBond. Hence, you'll hear a few names, but we'll typically refer to it as galvanized. I'd like to give you some feedback of a survey that was done out of the US, in fact, for CFOs and chief risk officers around a number of things, and a few things came out of that. One of the things was that what was startling is 76% of organizations said they want to spend less time on repetitive activities. So technology has reached the point where repetitive activities should have been taken away, and that shouldn't be something people are doing. that almost all the assurance activities in an organization should now be focused through the lens of risk, which kind of makes sense. I'm sure that's what IRMSA and those risk professionals on here today have been espousing in their organizations for years. And finally, that the process needs to be a return on investment, not just a cost center, but really a value add to the business. And again, those are the kind of words I've been hearing in an IRMSA context for a long time. And next, just to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the market, because in the past 14 months, there's been an enormous transformation. COVID has definitely had a huge impact on the adoption of technology in governance, risk and compliance and internal audit. I mean, it's been enormous. And there's a few things. So one of which is what we call functional integration. So we found that companies are no longer see their requirements as exclusively risk or compliance or audit, but actually almost every tender that we see for software, every requirements document says, I need a governance, risk and compliance solution, which has audit capability. And often they talk about the fact it must be data driven and have data analytic capability. So organizations no longer see this as one tool. The second thing is that increasingly, I've called this minority reports. I'm sure you all remember the Tom Cruise movie where he gets a little ball comes out of a computer and effectively tells him in advance what and where the crime is going to happen. And they go and arrest a person in advance before they've committed the crime. So increasingly, we're seeing that organizations are being asked to see problems before they've even happened. And then thirdly, the rise of the robots has happened, and that organizations are looking for smart risk and controls. So pervasive smart controls throughout an organization. And we speak a lot about this to organizations. So they're really what we're seeing. And there's certainly been a huge consolidation into the market. And I'll just explain this in terms of the last 20 years of technology, because certainly the last 12 months, it's been massive. So there used to be in the 90s all these individual products for risk, security, sales, accounting, manufacturing. They were all individual point solutions. And along comes somebody like the big ERP players, SAP and Oracle, and said, we're going to take those accounting, manufacturing, distribution products and finance, and we're going to integrate those into an integrated ERP solution. And of course, most organizations have integrated ERP solutions now. Then people like Siebel and Salesforce came along and said, we're going to take the marketing, customer support, customer relationship management, digital commerce, ordering, and so on, and we're going to put that into an integrated CRM system. And of course, people like SAP, Oracle have their own, there's Salesforce as well. And then, of course, there's things like risk, compliance, security, audit, and performance. And finally, an organization has come along and said, well, actually, we've built a tool through acquisition and organically, which integrates all of that. So the third big category is now this integrated GRC capability. Some analysts call this integrated risk management or integrated GRC. It's really a different theme or different name for exactly the same thing. And so in that respect, we're very lucky that Forrester released the latest report on GRC in the market. And as you can see by this Forrester report, it talks on the bottom axis around market presence and on the top axis, on the left axis by their current offering. And you can see on here, there's actually only a few organizations that are even represented. So SAP has some people who understand, IBM has Metric Stream here, but you can't see any of those old tools out there like the ones started by KPMG and Deloitte, the kind of Cures and Barnowls have kind of faded away from these kind of reports. And you can see that Galvanize is very much at the top. In fact, normally at the top right, it's quite a clump, but Galvanize is way ahead. So we're very, very lucky to be the distributor of them in this context, and we're going to show you why that makes sense now. Now, while I stop on this slide, let's move to the second poll. Let's just see what kind of technology organizations on this call are currently using. Quibus, can we pull up poll number 2, please? And your options are going to be around here in no particular order, although it looks alphabetic. Is it going to be Barnowl, Cura, Metric Stream, Teammate, Highbond? Maybe you're still using Excel, or is there some other tool that you're using for your risk management?
Give me 1 minute. I'm going to launch it now.
Fantastic. It is being launched. It's like a rocket. So Quibus is currently in danger of being being replaced by a robot process automation tool that does his 20,000 clicks, I can hear him doing, in 10 seconds.
Sorry, the software is a bit slow here on my side. Apologies.
Okay.
Okay, it's launching.
Okay, so what technology do you currently use? You can see the other options not on there, but let's just say Barnowl, Cura, Metric Stream, Teammate, HighBond. And if you use something else, just click Excel. Once you've submitted, you'll be able to see the results start coming in. Interesting, we've got 34 votes. So perhaps right at the end, we can start to see how that materializes right at the end if we get more votes in there. So about 50 odd people, and we can see that Barnowl is by far the leader. Sorry, apologies. Excel is by far the leader at 60%, followed by Barnowl, and then by Cura sitting behind that. So cool, very interesting to see. Thanks for your feedback. Okay, let me move to, so what really today is about is to talk about how digitization has fitted in. So I've got a couple of slides before we jump into the software, and we break this into 3 areas. We talk to our customers about risk management technology 1.0, which is all about an impact and likelihood scale so that technology could give you a heat map and you could do a kind of basic risk register and put that out there. And we're going to show you how our product does risk technology 1.0. Then we're going to talk about how it merged into risk technology 2.0, where you could do your risk assessments, but you could also have your compliance risk management plans, and then some of the software tools added internal audit to that function, because naturally you'd want to provide assurance on the compliance risks and the enterprise risks in the organization. And then risk technology 3.0, of which there's very few players in the market, actually say, in fact, it is a robotic process automation driven dashboarding process so that you have information on a real-time basis that is constantly analyzing the data that's sitting in the organization so that you can provide dashboards and then drill down to those kind of boring heat map risk register type reports, which hopefully at the end of today you're going to see are incredibly legacy and robots have replaced. How does that happen? At the top left, you can see there's 3 different colors here. Purple is going to be the process that's defined by 1.0, red/maroon is 2.0, and then green is 3.0. So the way HighBond does that is allow organization to define its strategy, its strategic risks, and its desired assurance levels. All of that pulls into what's called the frameworks, the risk and control framework structure, so that you can do a risk management assessment, which we call a project. And you'll understand why we call that projects in a moment. So you could execute many, many projects against this risk and control framework, which you might understand as a knowledge base or a library of risks. Then in 1.0, you'd perform a risk and a control assessment in your view, and typically done by manual or human data, inputting this, and out of that you'd have tasks, you'd have control tasks, risk tasks, and you'd have issues that jump out of that. So what happened in our view of risk 2.0 is what added to that is the concept of compliance and internal audit. Now, of course, Galvanize, which used to be called ACL, has been the world's leader in internal audit for years. We have 7,000 customers around the world, but we added compliance as well as internal audit and the concept of what's called compliance maps, which we're going to talk about in the software and show. And we'll show you how the content pulls into that so that from a compliance perspective, we're able to do full compliance projects and internal audit projects, all in the same system. And really that was the evolution of what I call risk 2.0. And then on the third and operational level is where robots started to get involved, where robots are there, they're constantly connected to the operational data, the ERP data of the system, to Excels, to CRM systems, and those robots are constantly analyzing this data to perform key performance indicators, to identify key risk indicators, which might automatically do risk assessments, or alternatively just provide metrics for the humans to be able to perform that process. So let's jump into the software. and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is the high bond launch pad. So effectively in here, we're not going to have time to go through it all. You can see on the top left, we have a thing called projects where we're able to do all the risk, compliance and audit projects that we talked about. We have a thing called the issue tracker, which is obvious where the issues that come out of risk or compliance can be tracked in one central place, finally, to be able to do that. In fact, we have some people or companies who just buy it for the ability to manage and track their external audit issues that comes out of that. Under the automation, we're going to show you what's called results and storyboards and robots and analytics. And of course, they all feed into each other. The robots drive the analytics and the results and the storyboards come out of that. And storyboards is really Galvanize's fancy word for dashboards, but it tells a story. And then finally, at the bottom, how we set this up is what's called strategy, which is what Galvanize calls risk management, because it's about enterprise risk management linked to strategy. How we put in the compliance maps and the assurance plans and schedule all of this. So this is the one system you can do that. So I'm going to go in to show you what risk 1.0 would have looked like in our system. And first of all, there's a thing called a strategy map. So in the strategy map, it's the ability to create all of your organizational entities and all of the organizational objectives or potentially processes. And as you can see, it's a one-to-many relationship where objectives are linked to entities and entities are linked to objectives, so that reporting comes much easier at the end of this process. So very, very easy thing to be able to do. And fundamentally in risk 1.0, it was about a risk assessment process, fundamentally driven. So in 1.0, you could do the details and you could capture the risk owner, the risk categories, the risk appetite and what the metrics would be. You'd be able to type in your impacts and what your causes might be and capture that information very much on the system. And then you'd be able to go do and perform an assessment. And it would look a little bit different to this in those kind of legacy tools. And on that, you can see that this particular risk is contexted by the risk tags, as well as the objectives. We talked about linking the objectives, and those objectives were linked to these entities, and that's how they got pulled in. So you can see we've got a couple of entities in here. We've got, if you were the kind of organization that does assessments in the context of locations like branch type risk assessments, you can see Joburg and Cape Town, and you can see perhaps you do risk assessments based on processes. Doesn't really matter in this case. And on the right hand side, you can see we've added three what we call risk scoring factors. We've said likelihood, to which we've added 100% weighting. So whatever you rate it, there's 100% weighting of it. We've added impact, where you've also got 100% weighting. And we've added a thing called velocity, where we've added a 50% weighting. So in other words, only 50% of what you would rate in this particular case would be in there. And just to give you an example, if I click on that, you can see in the system that on a 5-point scale, we've got a 5x5 matrix for likelihood. You can call it whatever you want. You can add any number of scales to this. Similar for impact, you can add any number. And then on velocity, it's a 3-point scale where it's 50% weight. So for example, if you rated a risk velocity as a 3, while it's a 3, it would only be 50% and only 1.5 would materialize into the assessment. I'll show you what I mean. So if we take the Joburg risk assessment as an example, you can see it's rated as a 3. It could have been almost 1 to 5. The impact is rated as a 4. 3 4s in my maths is 12. And then the velocity is rated 1 to 3 months, which we know was a 3, which of course with a 50% weighting is 1.5. And so 1.5 times 3 is 18. So you can see here, you could simply use 1 or 2 criteria. In fact, we can add multiple risk scoring criteria within just a few seconds within the system, and you can perform your risk assessment in here. And then, of course, you can go into any one of the organizational units and you can see exactly what they've assessed it. And in risk 2.0, AJ is going to show you exactly how you do that from a remote basis. So Galvanize had organized this before COVID, but it's perfect for doing risk assessments in a distributed environment. Then, of course, on a risk treatment level, you can identify many risk treatments. You might call them controls or risk mitigations. And so I'm going to open the Johannesburg ones. And in this particular case, you can see, actually, I won't, I'll use the product items. You can see here we've got 5 controls listed against that. And as we move to the right, you can actually say, well, if this control is effective in this entity, it's going to reduce my likelihood by 5%. And each control is actually assigned a percentage against that risk scoring factor. Likewise, you could do the same on the impact. If this risk control is effective, it would define the impact. And then from a velocity perspective, we've said 0. We're saying you can't control the velocity of something coming in this particular case. And so you can see that what happens is it then creates a score, effectively your control effectiveness score. And if I go back to the assessment, without going into the methodology and the calculations, the difference between the inherent risk score at the top and the residual risk score is how well those controls are performing in terms of an automated control assessment that we're going to show you. But of course, you could just do an inherent risk assessment, and the tool fully utilizes and enables that. So just to show you in risk 1.0, the assessment and the treatment, very basic stuff. And then in the system, you would be able to then go and perform a couple of reports within the system. So we have a couple of kind of heat map type simple reports in the system. One is called a strategy heat map, where you can see all your strategic objectives on the left. You can see them across your operations at the top, and you can see exactly what the risk rating would have been. And if we click on a residual level, you can see them inherent or residual. Alternatively, for a more traditional heat map, you can see here's a risk heat map where impact is on the Y, likelihood is on the X-axis, and you can see here's all the data. And if I go and scroll over item number 1, you can see that's the likelihood, impact, inherent and residual risk residual risk score for COVID. And of course, COVID is always going to skew this particular heat map given the time of year. But luckily, we have a time machine. So we can go back and we can look exactly what this risk and this whole profile would have looked at. We don't have to take a copy of the database to do it. It's just available on a single click on January the 1st, 2020. It's going to automatically update this, and you can see there's no such thing as COVID, and the highest risk is in fact the IT risk, and we can go and see those. And what's really cool in this particular technology is you might say, well, I don't want to see impact and likelihood. I've got other risk scoring criteria. I want my y-axis to be the velocity. So you can see that's automatically updated there as well. And so you can then just adjust that as you wish. And you can adjust the size of the bubbles and say, is that going to be based on my cost impact, my assurance levels, my inherent risk score, my residual risk score? Easy to change. And then with a single click, you can convert that into a PDF and put that into simple risk management. What's great about this, it gives you 3 pages. First page gives you the heat map and the risk descriptions, right over to the second. The third page gives you just the heat map if that's what you wanted, and then the fourth page giving you the risk descriptions. So again, I'm not going to go in and show you some of the basic stuff around risk registers and so on. That's simply too basic to show. I mean, every tool can do that. You can do that in Excel and to be able to achieve that. So really, risk 1.0. You can go in, perform a full assessment, get your heat information, do your heat map, do your information in and around the risk data. And AJ is now going to jump in and he's going to share his screen and he's going to show us exactly what happens when risk 2.0 gets involved. And risk 2.0 says, well, how do we include compliance into a standard way of doing this? And how do we provide assurance across all of that? AJ, over to you. You're on mute, AJ.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, good morning, everyone. So Phil mentioned risk 1.0 and how we do that basic risk assessment. But for purposes of today's demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the 3 aspects of assurance into the demo itself. So that's risk, compliance, as well as audit. Now, in the basic risk assessment model, Phil took you through step-by-step on identifying, assessing, inherently, residually, and then reporting. But additional features that we've created in the technology itself are things like what we call the risk workshop. So the risk workshop is very similar to a voting mechanism where a user wants to get input from various stakeholders in the business, and they provide input on what they actually think the rating should be. So in this scenario, what I've done is I've created a cybersecurity workshop, and within that, I've identified one risk called cybersecurity. So what I do is on that workshop, I can send this workshop to any members in the business, outside the business as well, as long as users have valid email addresses. And what happens is that workshop goes out. Users then respond. Once they respond, all that information feeds back into the system itself. So if we looked at cybersecurity in the Johannesburg region, you'll see I've got a few responses that have come in. For my example, I responded that the likelihood should be a 3, whereas Phil responded it should be a 4. What the system then does, it starts to aggregate all the results and gives you an aggregated score, which then you can actually apply to the risk profile, and then you can update that actual risk with the new ratings. When users actually respond to that risk, they've also got options of adding commentary information, as well as supporting documentation to motivate for that actual risk itself. And then you can obviously then track in terms of participants, who's responded, who's not responded, and what's the status of all the results coming in to that workshop. So that brings basically that risk aspect directly into the additional features in what we call risk 2.0. The rest of the demo, what I'm going to cover is Phil mentioned the different areas that we have. So we look at bringing compliance into the entire process, as well as bringing audit and looking at it from that combined assurance model where we then roll up to that strategic environment. So how do we actually manage that? And what we've done in the system is we've created an area called compliance maps, which stores your entire regulatory universe. And based on those regulations, basically it's all managed under standards and regulations. And then users have the ability to then import from the library where they can choose and upload that regulation specific to your requirements. You've also got features where you can actually manually build up your own regulation if required. Now, how does it actually work is what I'll do is I'll just select an example of Poppy as an example. So you'll see Poppy is my actual regulation. I'm sitting at 100% coverage. I've got one issue that's been raised, and my total assurance is sitting at 50%. So what we actually then do is we'll drill down into Poppy, and Poppy is broken down into different chapters. Within a chapter, you'll see we've got different conditions, and then within a condition, we've got different sections. Now, within those sections, you'll see there's certain requirements. So if we look at 19.1, 19.2, 19.1 talks about the integrity of personal information, and 19.2 talks about taking reasonable measures to identify external and internal threats. So when I select that actual requirement, you'll see there's a description of that requirement. I either mark it as applicable to my business or whether it's actually covered. And what happens from there is that we start mapping this to controls. So Phil spoke about that in that whiteboard, that we have that unified domain model, which is our risk and control libraries. So what we've done is we've linked this requirement to a control that's sitting in the library, and in turn that control is then linked to a project where those assurance activities take place. And I can see that this control has failed. I've not raised any issues against that control. But if I wanted to investigate further, I could actually drill down to that control, which is actually my framework. And within that framework, you can see that this requirement or this control is sitting in what we call a COVID monitoring. So this could be the actual CRMP risk management plan, where the controls are sitting, and those controls then go through certain testing. So under the control testing and monitoring, this is where I'm actually testing those controls. Now, if you're in compliance, you can test controls in 3 different ways. One is to physically investigate or manage that control. The second way is what Phil will actually talk about in version 3.0, which is called the automated control testing. And the way we actually do the automation of the control testing is on that control, with the use of our analytics tool, data will come in from different sources. What we do is we feed that data into what we call our results app, and within results we can start setting up things like KRIs and KPIs. So what happens here in this scenario, you'll notice that this control is actually automated. I cannot change whether it's passed or failed, but what happens is under the settings, what I've done is I've automated automated the control testing. So we brought in a metric that looks at the total production access to open incidents, and based on that metric, you can see it's a KPI. And what I've then done is I've set up different thresholds. So I said if it's less than 1, this control is operating effectively, whereas if it's greater than 1, this control is a failure. So on a continuous or automated monitoring basis, as data comes in, it updates the metric, and in turn that metric will help us determine whether that control passes or fails. So that's just the one way of actually testing that control itself. The other option is with linked to certain standards or regulations, you have a number of checklists or questionnaires that users need to respond to. And what we've done in the system is we've created a feature called Mission Control. Mission Control allows us to measure control performance. And the way we measure control performance is via the use of a controlled self-assessment questionnaire. So in that control, the second control, we've used control performance to test that control and verify the adequacy or effectiveness of that control. So if I scroll further down on that control, you'll see this is where we've set up our control performance. It's purely based on a checklist and on a schedule. So you'll see I've got my POPI 19 checklist. The questionnaires are populated there for me. I can then schedule it out and send it out to those control performers who would then respond, and then based on those responses, I can actually determine whether this control is passing or failing. So those are the 3 different ways that we would test for compliance, using automated internal control testing, using the mission control or control performance, or just physically manually inspecting that control and determining whether it passes or fails. Now, what happens in compliance maps is everything starts to roll bottom up for you. So if we look at the 2 requirements, both of them have actually failed. I'm sitting on a 0% assurance, and what happens is that rolls further up to show me chapter 3 is actually sitting on 0%. However, chapter 2, I'm sitting at 100%, meaning all the controls linked to those requirements have passed, and then the overall compliance is where we're sitting on a 50% compliance. Version 2.0 talks about basic reporting as well. So yes, we've got a basic compliance summary report. And what does it actually look like? It's a plain, clean report showing you the POPI Act sitting at overall assurance of 50%. It's got all my requirements. It covers whether what's applicable, what's covered, and then shows me the assurance scores on each and every requirement that we have listed out there for me. So that's bringing compliance with the use of your risk management into play. The last feature that I'll cover is how we manage that entire internal audit process. Now, in HighBond, we've created an area called projects, and projects is where we manage those assurance activities. So if you look at my projects list, you'll see I've got different types of projects. One is an audit project, some are related to my compliance risk management plan, and then I've also got my operational risk assessments in there. But as an auditor, you've got a couple of different ways to create audits. You'll see you've got, we've pre-populated an area called templates. So there's a list of different templates that are fully populated with all your audit processes, your risk and control information, as well as those testing steps, all built in there. Other features that we have as well are things like your assurance plan, where you can build up your audit plan. There's a scheduler where you can start scheduling either on a project level or on a people level. And there's also a timesheet management system where you can actually track and manage your time against each of those projects that itself. So I'll just show you a typical workflow that we follow through from an AP audit example. It's got a specific methodology that we follow, and what we use is called workflows. So in this scenario, on my dashboard, usually we start off with the planning phase. That's where your auditor would basically start documenting the background, the objective, the scope of that specific area. There's also a planning files area where you can start uploading all your planning documentation, your APMs, your engagement letters, and then we move over into Fieldwork, where we identify those different processes that we're going to be auditing. Now, what happens is, again, in line with those different standards, such as the IIA, we follow the entire IIA methodology. So as you can see, it starts off with your narrative, which is another word for your system description, where you describe that process that you're auditing, and then you move over into the risk and control matrix. Now, the beauty of the technology is that everything is sort of seamlessly integrated. So risk management or internal audit could actually leverage of what risk management is actually doing. And how do they do that is by creating different assurance projects, but also having that ability to then import risk information directly from the risk department. Again, I'm following through the methodology. Part of that process, we've got automated reporting. So at any given time, a user can automatically just generate a report and pick up on what's going on. And then from your risk and control matrix, we do the adequacy test. So this is showing me whether the controls are designed appropriately or design failure. And then we move on into the test plan. Test plan, this is where the user would start documenting the testing steps against each of those specific areas. So for example, if I clicked on a test plan report with a single click, and within seconds, I immediately get a report showing me what the output is all about. The last step is we move on into the testing phase, and this is purely where that magic of version 3.0 comes into play, the ability to automate the control testing as well. So you'll see I've got a control. I can pick up that this control has actually failed, and what the system actually then does is I've tested on, for example, this is doing a test on duplicate payments, and based on those exceptions, I can see that I've actually automated it again. Very same process as compliance testing. In this scenario, I'm looking at a different metric that is using data analytics to feed the data into results and then helping us automate the testing process. So in this scenario, I've got my metric, and then based on that metric, I can then set up different thresholds, and then it tells me whether this control is passing or failing. Now, over and above the audit process that you follow, what we also have done is we've created a few different features in the system. Things like ACL for Windows. What this allows you to do is, as an auditor, you can work in an offline mode. So it gives the auditor the capability to synchronize the audit onto their local machine and then work in an offline mode. Risk management can also use the exact same capability. You can identify risks, you can pick up controls, you can upload supporting evidence as well. And then we've also created a mobile app, which is based on your Android as well as your iOS devices, where a user can start using the app. It works great for signing off and reviewing, and then the assurance teams can use it for documenting evidence and uploading supporting evidence to that assurance activity that you're following. So in a nutshell, that covers the entire audit workflow from your planning right up to your reporting and follow-up. Concluding the audit, the system starts to calculate your overall assurance score, showing me my assurance score on each of those individual areas. And then under fieldwork reporting, your reports are pre-populated for you. So as an auditor, you've got a few different options to report on what the audit is all about. There's a PDF, there's a Word report, and there's also a PowerPoint, which then gives you a high-level view of all the findings that's been identified. So I'll just show you an example of what a typical audit report would look like. Again, within seconds, a single click, and then it draws out all that information and it brings it into one sort of report format for you. So it covers your background, your objective, the scope, and then further down under results, it's got all that information from result summary to your finding summary, and then the details of the finding listed out there for you. So that's in a nutshell version 2.0. Phil's going to cover version 3.0, and he'll go into detail of how we use the analytics or data analytics to start the automation process. So Phil, back to you.
Great, thank you very much, AJ. And I have been monitoring some of the questions, so thanks very much. And I'll hopefully get to those. If not, I've written them all down so I can address them at the end. The one question I would address now is if internal audit makes use of Teammate, can HiBond be integrated? And the answer is no, not really. I mean, Teammate is such a legacy tool compared to this. Our goal, of course, is that everybody would use a standard platform for everything. Galvanize is built so that what really makes sense is that you'll use one tool for everything. Having said that, certainly a lot of customers, especially for internal audit, buys for that single purpose to be able to do that. But in truth, Ralph, if you really want that, let's get it in front of the internal auditors, and we'll quickly convince them that one tool is the right answer. Hopefully they'll choose our tool, but one tool is certainly the right solution. So let me just quickly refresh this and make sure that I'm still online, because remember, we're completely cloud-based. There's no internal requirement for infrastructure whatsoever. So I'm going back to risk 3.0, And you may recall that we talked about the assessment and the fact that it was automated potentially. And there's two ways of looking at this. So if I actually click on this specific automated assessment, remember we assess this risk using likelihood, impact, and velocity. So in this particular case, we are automating the assessment metric. You can see this is the cyber risk where the risk scoring factor is the impact, and we're looking at the monthly count of unauthorized system access. And this is a key risk indicator in this particular case, and we can schedule our, I'm just going to right click and we'll go and look at the data in a moment. You can see that we can create a threshold of less than 5 would be insignificant, 5 to 15 would be minor. I don't need to take you through the rest, I'm sure you know, and then anything over 35 would be catastrophic. And so in this particular case, there's 87. Now, if I go and click on this item on the underlying basis here, you can see how many breaches there were, whether it's a critical priority. And if I move across to the right, we can see exactly from the system that we're integrated to whether it's a breach in Active Directory, Office 365, TreeFlex, TripleDex, whatever systems you're using. It's really easy for us to be able to analyze that kind of stuff. And I'll show you how in just a while using our robots. So effectively, we connect to data sources, we analyze the data, and then you set thresholds which will automatically update. Now, how do we do that? We do that in a thing called robots. And I'm just going to switch across to another browser here to show you our robots. And our robots would be sitting under here. If I go to my home page and I click on our robots, you can see there's tons of robots. Now, robots can start to become quite complex and involve some scripting, but effectively what a robot is the ability to pre-program a set of events that would happen in the system. So while that loads, effectively what it would give me the opportunity to be able to do is when I'm in my risk, let me jump back to my risk, I've got a thing here called risk metrics. So we've talked about one of the KRIs might be number of the count of unauthorized system access. Another KRI might be detected security incidents. I'm going to go into that data and show what it looks like. In this case, we've got a KPI. So in this case, it's calculating the cost of these security incidents based on a metric in the organization. Now, you might be the type of organization that says, well, don't automatically update my likelihood, impact, and velocity. Give me the information so that I can see these. Give me the underlying data. And in this particular case, you can see the underlying data in terms of whether it was a denial of service, a phishing event that had happened. Give me the opportunity to go and do a manual risk assessment on that data. Alternatively, automatically update. Customers have been asking us for years, and I used to work at other risk software companies, as most people here know, and of course nobody can do this because they don't have the data analytics capability. So we're able to go into any system, analyze that data, and bring in those key risk indicators. But over and above that, why wait for the next risk assessment? We have a thing here called triggers. So what triggers does is sits effectively above the data layer and is always monitoring it, giving you the ability to create events from the data. Now, in this particular case, what happens is a trigger has a condition, an action, and a frequency. So the condition would say, well, if there's a detected incidents greater than 12,000, which we haven't reached yet, then simply send a notification out to AJ. We could, in fact, send a questionnaire out. We could create a status or priority and do this on a real-time basis. So if that reached 12,000, automatically, no manual intervention, AJ would get a communication from the system. Another trigger might be IP identification. So if we get any denial of service, for example, from an IP address from a fictional 100.1.100.1, then enable a workflow group, assign it to Philip and notify AJ, and do this on a daily basis. Don't do this real time. Every day I want to report and I want to be able to see what somebody from that IP address had done. And we're using cybersecurity as a very simple example. We could be connecting to your ERP system, and I'll show you how we pull data out of that as well to be able to achieve it. So again, the underlying data is there. It's designed to be able to provide key risk indicators, key performance indicators, and provide you the access to that underlying data and give you triggers to be able to achieve that. Now here you can see a thing called cybersecurity storyboard. So if I click on that, and I've touched very briefly on what the robots would do, but if I click on that, effectively this is what's called the storyboard of the dashboard. And we don't think you should look at from a risk from the perspective of a risk register or otherwise. We think you should look at it from the perspective of a dashboard. So from this dashboard, you can see the security incidents that are under investigation. Okay, and I could click and drill down. How many have been prevented? I could look at my information by type. I could look at it by region. I could have KPIs and KRIs into a single dashboard at any point in time. And one of the questions we get is, well, can I share this with other people? And the answer is, well, absolutely you can, and I'll show you just in a moment. I'll jump to another screen. Let me jump back to the robots as we were saying before. Here's a whole bunch of robots sitting in the system. You can see you can have fun with the naming. We've got Ethan, the email bot. What this one does is it goes into the emails of like Office 365 or Gmail. We've got native connectors. It analyzes for the keywords that you're looking for, like circumvent, risk, steroids in the case of South African rugby. And if we look to other items, you can see if we click on general journal analysis, it'll actually drill us down and we can go in and we can see the robots that are running. In this particular case, we can see what the tasks runs might be in there. And then we could go and drill into whatever data underlies that robot and whatever it's pulling through. So one of the questions I often get is, do we access the ERP data? Can we use our ERP data for risk? And absolutely, our robot can go in and it can connect to the ERP system. In this case, it's finance data. It's looking at procurement data. It's looking at the invoice data, who's making payments, when they're making payments, when it's being cleared. And then we can aggregate the finance data into these kind of storyboards. And we can share these with organizations as well. And in case you want anyone in the organization to be able to view these dashboards, we can simply add existing users, or there's a little thing called a link here. So if I go to the link and I go and click copy, that's copied to my storyboard. If I go and paste that now into my storyboard, into my link, it'll automatically pull up this storyboard. I can't drill down to the underlying data, but I can see this storyboard. So if you've got board members or people in the risk environment who need to see the data, then they're very easily able to go and do that. And a little thing called presentation mode, if you click it on, it'll actually load it almost as a kind of a PowerPoint presentation, and you can click through these on a one-by-one basis as you see fit and go through it. As I go through, you can see exactly what the data is, and you can actually use it. Even though you're not a user, you could be using the dashboard data sitting from here, including the scroll over data. Now we've got some other storyboards in here which are particularly relevant. So for example, on the first one, this is a great report that I've seen used at the C-suite. So this is where the C-suite wants to see all the different risk types in the organization: enterprise risk, compliance, IT, audit, vendor risk, and so on. And using its own methodology and scoring, actually has an aggregated health score by area. So it can see how the organization is doing on a high level. It can talk to performance, depending, it's a key performance indicator. So these guys obviously have an algorithm to say we measure performance in this way. We go in the data, the robot could analyze that information and show what's happening there to be able to achieve that. Their definition of resilience is also a KPI. So in other words, something happens in the context of vendor risk or business continuity. They're able to analyze that. It's always sitting in the data, but it could have some control self-assessment or some manual inputs, and that's sitting in there too. We would be wrong if we left audit out of this process. So from an audit health score perspective and from a compliance health score perspective. You saw earlier that AJ showed we've got the laws and regulations in the system. That's going to be assessed continually in CRMPs, and that aggregated data eventually ends up on one of these storyboards. And then, of course, kind of summary levels of strategic risk performance on kind of different views of how you might want to see that. Some of the strategic risks in the organization, cybersecurity, inability to implement technology, and so on, shown in a tree map, and then actually shown in a table format, because maybe that's what some people want to be able to see. Some organizations want to be able to see issues. right? Specifically, okay, so we've done all this risk, we've got the controls. What about the tasks and the issues? What's outstanding? How are they looking based on the severity of these things? If you're looking from an assurance level and you have issues outstanding from some of your key risks, they would automatically become a high severity. Who owns these? What's the severity? How much is it costing us? Let's have a look at this from our project's perspective in terms of our heat maps. So guys, I think you're starting to get the idea that risk is actually an input to the story that we're telling the C-suite and the executives in the organization, and what's happening in that respect. And so somebody asked the question about, can we do quantitative analysis? So we can't do something like a Monte Carlo simulation. There are tools way better than anything that's available in the risk management market to be able to do that. What we can do is pretty much any analytic you might imagine. So a most complex analytic we've probably done is for a bank, where they wanted assurance on the fact that they're not sure that their credit department is calculating the interest payments on their credit right, and we had to go and recalculate all of those and make sure that they were tying up on a basic level. Some risks are as simple as going and making sure that your employees aren't directors of the vendors that are supplying you. So there's a huge amount of analysis of that. So quantitative risk, I would argue we do in terms of KRIs and KPIs. It can get very complex. Scenario and Monte Carlo type analysis, that's certainly not our key forte in that example, to be able to do that. So you can see, if I jump back to my presentation and I talked about risk, the different levels of risk, you can see risk 1.0. We talked about how Galvanize does simple risk assessments, impact, likelihood, and so on, which increasingly people don't want to do in a system. What we find is that risk 2.0 really included audit wanted assurance on this, compliance joined into that as well. And we've seen a lot of tenders and requirements like that. But now what everyone is saying, well, we need compliance, we need risk, we need audit, must be one system exclusively, but we also want robotic process automation in the form of data analytics to drive key risk indicators, key performance indicators, key compliance indicators. And this gives you the information that I think Chris Palm talked about in his main introduction, is giving you the information to be a risk resilient organization. Now, I'm very conscious that that I missed that we've got about 3 minutes left. And just a couple of quick surveys. So Quibus, if we can quickly do, does the organization you're in currently use RPA or data analytics in their risk assessment process? I'd be very interested because we've got a couple of questions on that. But I'm of the opinion that very few organizations actually use it in their risk assessment process. So bringing up the form, does your organization, let's just keep this one on for 30 seconds and then we'll move on to the last one. Kind of, I just thought I'd put that in there because maybe you think you do and you're not too sure, whatever it is. So kind of, that's an interesting one. Maybe you use some third-party tool and you kind of use that, but maybe it's not the same risk tool, but the majority by far is no. But nobody's an absolute yes, which isn't too surprising because, of course, risk 3.0 is new technology. I mean, Galvanize is really blazing the trail. I nearly mixed that one up. Thank you, Quibus. And 3 people said yes. So maybe they're the same people who are using HighBond as the risk assessment tool. And then finally, let's do the last one. Do you think an automated risk assessment has value? So a lot of people have said they don't use it. Maybe you don't think it has value. Like, I'd love to hear if you think there's relevance in using data to drive it. So Quibus, let's do the last one. Do you think that an automated risk assessment has value? Is it worth doing it manually every time, or would it be nice for some of the data to be automatically updated? Impact, likelihood, maybe just control assessment testing and so on. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. So we're sitting on 27 votes. All of our future customer base is sitting there. And hopefully you can see, guys, that the reason you talk about, when I worked at Cura 10 years ago, people saying, can you integrate us into Teammate? And the answer was, well, why would you want to, right? They're 2 separate tools. Now the answer is, why would you want to? Because you should be using one tool for everything. Now I'm going to make that argument, even if it isn't us. Barna has a great tool for risk and audit management. It really does compliance as well. So maybe it should be them, but it should be one tool. Our argument is we're the best tool in the market, but give us an opportunity to demonstrate and see if we have that. I'll have to ask my boss. Thank you very much. I appreciate that one. So that might be the Cura guys on the call answering that. Okay, So I'm going to open that for any final questions. I'm very conscious we only had 1 minute left. And of course, in our presentation, let me jump through this. This is AJ and I when I had a 10. Here's our email address. I can assure you that if you email this, I see there's people in here who've come from outside South Africa, but we have a whole team that work in countries all over Africa. So we would be pleased to make sure if you email us, we'll get back to you within 24 hours and make sure we answer your questions or queries. Yeah, so RPA, Greg mentioned RPA is particularly valuable for shift to preventive controls, and I agree with that entirely. That was the whole minority report argument. We talked about that. JC Haynes, apologies if my pronunciation is wrong. What's the cost? The answer is we're certainly in the upper end of the market. In that, depending on what you want, we're able to provide you a quotation with great pleasure. Please email us. We'd love to be able to talk to you about your needs and be able to do that. So we're more expensive than Excel, but less expensive than SAP, and as are all the tools in that range. So as somebody said again, how is strategic risk management dealt with scenario planning? Again, so we do strategic risks extremely well. We do operational risks very well. We do data analysis very well. We're not a scenario planning tool, and I suspect we're not particularly looking to be. Bearing in mind, Galvanize is a global tool, and a lot of people see risk as a precursor to things like controls, assurance, SOX testing, and so on. I suspect that's not high on the agenda for Galvanize to build as a function. To be able to do that. One question was, is it scalable? This is cloud-based. It is sitting in Amazon Web Services all around the world. You can choose your instance being the one in Cape Town in South Africa. It cannot be more scalable. We could turn you on in about 30 seconds. You could be up and running, adding 50 users, import 10,000 of your historic risks in the same day. So when we implement, we don't actually implement, we train. The software is standard, it's out of the box, there's no customization, it's all highly configurable. All of those different impact scoring methods, completely configurable. So our implementation cost is often 2 to 5% of a project, compared to others, of course, which I know is considerably more than that. So yes, scalable. Would you please clarify integration where you use different software for accounting? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Our robot goes into the database of your accounting software. So whether you're using ACPAC or Sage or Oracle or otherwise, effectively the robot goes into the database and connects on the database level and pulls the underlying data. We have about 800 customers in Africa, including South Africa, doing all of that. So we are very used to doing it on a very large scale, but we also have native connectors that you could do it yourself. So something, there are so many connectors, it's too long for me to mention, but effectively that's what we do. Now, a lot of people we implement with make the comment, but isn't that the difficult part? No, that's what we've been doing for 25 years. I promise you that's the easy part for us. You might think it's complex because few people in the organization know where the data is sitting, but we do. And if there's anyone in the organization who works with in the call who's got JD Edwards, SAP, Oracle, we've actually pre-mapped all those data models. So we know where your data is already sitting to be able to do that. Does the system facilitate importing historic data from Cura? Absolutely it does. From Transnet, we get that question quite a lot. But of course, those third-party tools export to Excel. We import them. I'd like to clarify that once they're in the system, you have to manage them in the system. But of course, as so many customers are moving across to Galvanize, of course, we upload the legacy data. And we can even import the existing assessments, or you can import the data and you can then reassess it as a start and a go. So we're able to do that. So guys, I'm certainly out of time. I'm 3 minutes over. I want to thank you very much, IRMSA, for giving us the platform to do this. You as a potential base of people here, giving us the opportunity to talk exclusively about our software, which again, all the software companies feel very nervous doing in other contexts because we know you're there for other reasons. AJ for brushing his hair for this session, and everyone else for attending. Please. So again, JC has said, how do you configure the system? It really is click and drop. You can do it yourself, but we would have to show you how to do this given we've run out of time. But thank you very much for your time. And the guys from MTN just arrived. They've missed the main event. I know that the person doing the Q&A has so actually I will open if anybody wants to stay on, because we don't have a deadline. IRMSA have said the person who was doing the Q&A hasn't been able to jump on. So if you've got questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself, or perhaps just stick your hand up, and it would be a pleasure for us to kind of discuss and see if there's any specific questions you've got. Gives me a chance to stop talking. And you can raise your hand at the top. There's a little button with a little hand, a smiley face and hand. You click on raise hand, and that's what it looks like. Okay. Oh, sorry, I can't see all of those hands, so I'm not the administrator here, unfortunately. So I'm going to ask you to unmute. Okay, I think it says McKay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can certainly hear you. Please proceed.
Okay. My question is just regarding the three modules. Is it possible for us to buy maybe the first module and then upgrade with the second module in the following year, and then the third one in the third year? Can one buy it like that?
McKay, certainly thank you for the question. The answer is yes. There's a lot more than 3 modules, but we've really just touched on it on a high level. Some people start with risk and move into compliance. Some people start with the data analytics part, the assurance part, and then move that up into audit and so on. The answer is absolutely. If you email us, we'd love to show you, and of course, organize with you a rollout and how that might work. It'd be a pleasure. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, in which case, guys, thank you very, very much indeed. A great pleasure. We're going to sign off. I will, apologies, there's another question's come in, a guy called Anton. Please fire away, Anton. I think, sorry, it's not Anton, but somebody has. Please fire away.
Zaid. Hello, Zaid.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. Wonderful. It's very interesting and interesting graphics. I like the storyboarding portion of it. It really speaks a different language, which I like. The one thing that I'm keen on maturing is the risk management side. And what I was hoping to see was what additional tools you have over our current, for example, Barnal or Cura on the risk management side, not the audit side. I know that is well catered for, the compliance side is well catered for, but the risk management side is something that we need to mature. And I was hoping to see some more additional tools that would help us do risk management better.
Okay, so I'm going to answer that and then ask you another question, if that's okay. So Zaid, I must say both Cura and Barnal are very mature risk management tools, and they're both very good. In fact, some of the best in the world. So it's very hard to compete with tools that have been doing it for that long and that mature. So I don't think in the standard risk management process we have much as a pure isolated risk 1.0, risk 2.0. I think that they apart from the fact they might not have the advantages that we do around the cloud infrastructure and the great interface, they're great tools. What we believe we add in the difference is the ability to integrate data. The ability to use the data to be able to drive your KPIs, your KRIs, to automate your control assessments and the like. And previously our risk customers have been asking for that to be able to do. And I've seen a lot of tools, the big tools around the world still can't do what Cura Barnal can do domestically. My next question is then, what would you want to see that you can't currently see? Or can't currently do?
Yeah, well, fundamentally, there's two sides to the risk management space in terms of tools, and in terms of let's talk. I'm just trying to contextualize it because not everything doesn't necessarily have to be within the system. So things like what most at risk normally does is the Monte Carlo simulation modeling and scenario planning and then being able to apply that to what's his name, to either projects or various scenarios.
So indeed,
yeah.
so there are a couple of things like bow tie. It's a very specialized market. Somebody like Galvanize, that's so big around the world, is never going to do something that specialized. Monte Carlo and simulation also. Galvanize is just too big to go and build something that specialized. I hear your point, so no, we're certainly not in that space. But Zaid, without taking up too much time, please do email me. I'd love to have this conversation. I don't have your contact details. I'll certainly give you a call afterwards to be able to do. But our key advantage is really the fact that we use the data in the organization. We're bringing everything that's available in your data, whether you're cloud-based or on-premise data, into your risk assessment. But most importantly, what you probably identified is we're very control-centric. We have the ability to monitor controls like no other tool out there. Now, some organizations and risk managers say it's all about the risk assessment and the conversation, and I respect that. Others say, well, once we've identified the risk, it's all about how we mitigate those or control them or treat them and how we measure that and can we automate that and make them smart and clever. And if that's the kind of person that you are and your culture of your organization, then we're absolutely the right tool to be able to do that for you. So hopefully that answers. But we're certainly out of time, so it's 12:10. I've certainly over. IRMSA, I know, have lunch at 12 o'clock on the dot. They have a lunch delivery that comes in, and it's just lovely working at IRMSA. It's like a big corporate out there, so I don't want to keep them past. But otherwise, thank you very, very much all for your time. Any questions you've got, it would be a pleasure to answer on email, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future. Thank you, and I hope you have a lovely day further.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.